The police officer jokingly lifted her skirt and regretted it when he heard her last name. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The humid summer air hung thick and still over Oakwood Park, barely stirred by the occasional half-hearted breeze. Children's laughter echoed from the distant playground, a cheerful counterpoint to the focused activity around the community outreach tents. Maya Evans, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that accentuated the kind, intelligent lines of her face, carefully arranged pamphlets on the neighborhood watch information table. At 47, she possessed a quiet grace, an unassuming presence that often led people to underestimate her. She was new to the city, a recent transplant seeking a fresh start and a way to channel her enduring commitment to community service into this unfamiliar urban landscape. The police department's Community Day was her first major volunteer undertaking here, a chance to connect, to understand the local pulse. She meticulously straightened a stack of flyers detailing home security tips, her movements precise and thoughtful. A shadow fell over her table. Maya looked up into the sun-creased face of Officer Rick Donnelly, a man whose reputation, she was slowly learning, preceded him. He was a 20-year veteran of the force, barrel-chested, with a swagger that broadcasted his belief in his own untouchable status. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, held a perpetual smirk, as if the world were a private joke only he was privy to. He was flanked by two younger officers, basked in his reflected glory, their expressions mimicking his amusement. Well, what have we got here?" Donnelly boomed, his voice unnecessarily loud, drawing a few curious glances from nearby booths. "Little Miss Community Helper, making sure all us citizens stay safe and sound." He leaned against her table, dislodging a carefully arranged pile of brochures. Maya calmly res-tacked them. "Good morning, Officer Donnelly," she said, her tone polite but neutral. "Just trying to provide some helpful information for the residents." Donnelly chuckled, a sound like gravel rattling in a can. "Helpful information? Huh? I got some helpful information for you, sweetheart." He winked at his companions, who snickered appreciatively. Maya felt a familiar prickle of unease. She had encountered men like Donnelly before, men who used their position, their perceived power, to belittle and intimidate, especially women who didn't immediately defer to their brand of boorish charm. As she bent down to retrieve a pen she had dropped, her modest, knee-length summer skirt momentarily riding up an inch or two, Donnelly saw his opening. With a lewd grin, he reached out and, with a feigned playful gesture, hooked a finger under the hem of her skirt, lifting it a few inches further before letting it drop. "Oops, my hand slipped," he guffawed, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Just checking if everything's secure under there for community safety, you know." The two younger officers roared with laughter. Maya straightened up slowly, her face flushing a deep crimson, but her eyes, when she met Donnelly's, were steady, devoid of the fear or flustered embarrassment he clearly expected. The air around them seemed to crackle with a sudden, icy tension. A few other volunteers, a retired couple from the Historical Society and a young intern from the mayor's office, had witnessed the exchange. They looked away quickly, their faces etched with discomfort, unwilling to intervene, unwilling to draw Donnelly's attention to themselves. Even the children's laughter from the playground seemed to dim. "Officer Donnelly," Maya said, her voice quiet but carrying an unexpected weight, each word carefully enunciated, "your behavior is unprofessional and completely inappropriate." That was an act of harassment. Donnelly's smirk faltered for a split second, surprised by her directness, her refusal to be cowed. Then, his arrogance reasserted itself, thicker than before. "Harassment? Lighten up, dollface. Can't you take a joke? Some people got no sense of humor these days. Just try to bring a little sunshine into your oh-so-serious day." He puffed out his chest. "Besides, who are you going to complain to? Me?" He gestured to his badge with a thumb. "I'm a law around here." He turned to his snickering acolytes. "Come on, boys, let's leave little Miss Priss to her pamphlets. Some people just can't appreciate good old-fashioned fun." As they swaggered away, leaving Maya standing amidst the scattered brochures, and the heavy silence of the surrounding volunteers, a cold fury mixed with a weary sense of resignation settled within her. This wasn't just about a crude joke or an inappropriate touch. This was about power, about abuse, about a culture that allowed men like Donnelly to operate with impunity. She took a deep, steadying breath. He had asked who she was going to complain to. He had no idea. He had no idea that his good old-fashioned fun had just set in motion a chain of events that would rock his world and expose the rot within his carefully protected domain. And he certainly had no idea about the name she carried, a name that resonated with a legacy of integrity and justice, a name he was about to learn to regret ever crossing. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Maya Evans, or more accurately, Maya Thompson Evans, carried a legacy she rarely spoke of. She was the widow of Commissioner David Thompson, a man who had been a titan of police reform in a major metropolitan city on the East Coast before his untimely death 5 years prior. David had been a legend, a man who had fearlessly rooted out corruption, championed community policing, and fought tirelessly for accountability within the ranks. His name was still whispered with reverence in law enforcement circles that valued integrity, and with dread by those who did not. After his passing, Maya had thrown herself into volunteer work, continuing his mission in her own quiet way, advocating for victims' rights and police community partnerships. The move to this new, smaller city had been an attempt to find a measure of peace, to step out from under the shadow of her husband's considerable legacy, and yet to still contribute meaningfully. She had chosen to use her maiden name, Evans, for most of her local interactions, wanting to be seen for her own merits, not as the commissioner's widow. But the incident with Officer Donnelly had stirred something fierce within her, a protective instinct not just for herself, but for the principles David had dedicated his life to. The humiliation she felt was sharp, but it was quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve. This wasn't merely personal, it was systemic. Donnelly's casual arrogance, the way his colleagues had enabled his behavior, the embarrassed silence of the onlookers, it all pointed to a deeply ingrained culture of disrespect and impunity. As soon as the Community Day event concluded, Maya, her composure regained but her determination solidified, went to the local precinct headquarters. It was a hulking, impersonal building, its facade grim and unwelcoming. She asked to speak with Officer Donnelly's direct supervisor. After a dismissive wave from the desk sergeant, she was directed to Sergeant Frank Miller, no relation to the offending officer, but clearly cut from the same cloth. Sergeant Miller was a man whose physique had long since surrendered to gravity and donuts, his uniform straining at the seams. He listened to Maya's account of the incident with an expression of barely concealed impatience, his fingers drumming a restless tattoo on his cluttered desk. "So, let me get this straight, Mrs. Evans," he said when she finished, his tone condescending. Officer Donnelly, a decorated 20-year veteran, made a little joke, maybe got a bit familiar. "And you're here filing a harassment complaint?" "Sergeant," Maya replied, her voice calm but firm. "Officer Donnelly put his hands on me without my consent and made lewd, demeaning comments in a public setting while on duty. That is not a little joke. That is misconduct, and it warrants a formal investigation." Sergeant Miller leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "Look, Mrs. Evans, Donnelly's a good cop. One of the best. He's got a certain sense of humor. Yeah, maybe it's not for everyone, but he means no harm. He was probably just trying to be friendly, break the ice. You city volunteers, sometimes you can be a bit sensitive." Maya felt a surge of anger at the blatant gaslighting, the attempt to minimize Donnelly's actions and paint her as the problem. "Sensitive?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Sergeant, are you suggesting that being sexually harassed by a police officer is something a woman should simply tolerate?" Miller waved a dismissive hand. "Now, don't go throwing around words like sexually harassed. That's a strong accusation. All I'm saying is, maybe you misunderstood his intentions. Donnelly's an old-school guy. Sometimes these things happen. No need to make a federal case out of it, right?" He offered a placating smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "I'm sure if you just let it go, everyone can move on. No harm, no foul." Maya stood her ground. I will not let it go, Sergeant. I expect a formal complaint to be filed and a thorough investigation to be conducted. And I would like a copy of that complaint report. Sergeant Miller's smile vanished. His eyes hardened. Look, lady, you new in town, right? Maybe you don't understand how things work around here. Officer Donnelly has a lot of friends in this department. People who respect him. You start making waves, making accusations against a good cop. Well, things could get unpleasant. For you. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Maya met his gaze without flinching. Are you refusing to take my complaint, Sergeant? Miller sighed, a sound of exaggerated exasperation. No, of course not. We follow procedure here. He grudgingly pulled out a form, scribbled a few cursory notes, and then pushed it across the desk. There, it's noted. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual police work to do. He didn't offer her a copy. He didn't give her a complaint number. He clearly intended for her note to disappear into the bureaucratic ether. As Maya left the precinct, the sense of frustration was immense, but it was now tinged with a grim satisfaction. Sergeant Miller's dismissive attitude, his blatant attempt to protect Donnelly, had only confirmed the depth of the problem. She had her first concrete piece of evidence of the old guard closing ranks. This was no longer just about Officer Donnelly's misconduct. It was about a systemic refusal to hold officers accountable, a culture that protected abusers and silenced victims. She thought of David, of his relentless fight against such entrenched corruption. He would have been furious, but he also would have been methodical, strategic. And so would she. She pulled out her phone, not to call a lawyer, not yet, but to make a few notes, documenting Sergeant Miller's name, his badge number, the time of their meeting, his exact words. The fight had just begun, and Maya Thompson Evans was preparing for battle. She knew this system was designed to wear down complainants, to make them give up, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know the fire that Donnelly's casual cruelty had ignited. The days following Maya's encounter with Sergeant Miller were a study in bureaucratic stonewalling. Her follow-up calls to the precinct regarding her complaint were met with vague assurances, transfers to voicemail boxes that were perpetually full, or outright denials that any formal complaint had been properly logged. It was clear that Sergeant Miller and his allies intended to bury the incident, hoping Maya would simply give up and go away. But Maya was not easily deterred. She had learned from David the importance of meticulous documentation and persistence in the face of institutional resistance. She kept a detailed log of every interaction, every unanswered call, every dismissive remark. She also began to subtly probe the community network she was building through her volunteer work. Without revealing the specifics of her own experience, she listened for whispers, for other stories of police misconduct, particularly involving Officer Donnelly or his known associates. It didn't take long for a pattern to emerge. Several small business owners in minority neighborhoods spoke of Donnelly's protection visits, which often felt more like shakedowns. Younger residents recounted instances of harassment, of being stopped and questioned without cause, of Donnelly's demeaning and often racially charged language. Most of these incidents had gone unreported, the victims either too intimidated or too convinced of the futility of complaining. This was the culture the Watchmen, as Captain Rodriguez would later name them, had cultivated, one of fear and resignation. Simultaneously, Maya observed Officer Donnelly from a distance. He seemed to be enjoying his perceived victory, his swagger even more pronounced. She saw him holding court with his cronies at a local diner frequented by off-duty cops, his laughter loud and self-congratulatory. He made a point of driving his patrol car slowly past the community center where Maya volunteered, sometimes giving her a long, pointed stare, a silent message of intimidation. He clearly believed he was untouchable. One afternoon, while Maya was at the library researching local ordinances and police accountability structures, she saw a young officer she vaguely recognized from the Community Day event, the one who had looked uncomfortable during Donnelly's harassment. His name tag read Ramirez. He was sitting alone, poring over a thick legal textbook, a frown of concentration on his face. On impulse, Maya approached him. "Officer Ramirez?" she asked gently. He looked up, startled, a flicker of recognition, and then wariness in his eyes. "Mom, I'm Maya Evans. We met briefly at the community day in the park." Ramirez nodded, but said nothing, his gaze guarded. "I was wondering," Maya continued, choosing her words carefully, "if you might know if there's a standard procedure for volunteers to follow up on concerns they might have about officer conduct. I had a less than satisfactory interaction recently, and I'm finding it difficult to get any clarity." Officer Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around the quiet library, as if afraid of being overheard. "It's complicated, ma'am," he said, his voice low. "Sometimes things don't get handled the way they should." "I'm beginning to understand that," Maya said, her tone empathetic. "It must be difficult for officers who genuinely want to serve with integrity when they see others not upholding those standards." Ramirez looked down at his book. "Some of the older guys, they have their own way of doing things. It's hard to question it, especially when you're new." Maya saw an opening, a potential ally, however reluctant. "Officer Ramirez," she said softly, "if an officer witnesses misconduct, even if it's by a senior colleague, what is their duty?" He looked up, his eyes troubled. "Our duty is to report it, ma'am, to uphold the law for everyone." "And does that happen?" Maya pressed gently. Ramirez hesitated for a long moment. "Not always," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes it's easier to look the other way, where you get labeled a troublemaker, an outsider. It can affect your career, your assignments, even your safety." Maya nodded, understanding the immense pressure he was under. "Thank you for your honesty, Officer Ramirez," she said. "It takes courage to even acknowledge that. I hope, for the sake of this city, that more officers find that courage." She didn't push him further. She had planted a seed. She knew that true change often started with individuals like Ramirez, those who were troubled by the status quo, but lacked the support or the impetus to challenge it. As Maya left the library, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Donnelly and his ilk were not just a few bad apples. They were symptomatic of a diseased tree, its roots running deep within the department. To bring them down, she would need more than just her own complaint. She would need to expose the entire rotten system. Her late husband, Commissioner Thompson, had often said that sunlight was the best disinfectant. Maya was about to architect a way to flood the dark corners of the Northwood Police Department with a very bright, very revealing light. The old guard believed they operated in shadows, protected by a code of silence and a culture of intimidation. They had underestimated Maya Evans, underestimated her resolve, and most critically, underestimated the power of the legacy she carried, a legacy that was about to make its presence felt in Northwood City. Maya knew that a frontal assault on the Northwood Police Department's entrenched old guard by a relative newcomer, a mere volunteer, would be futile. She needed leverage, a way to bypass the protective layers of cronyism represented by Sergeant Miller and his ilk. She needed to reach someone with genuine authority, someone who was either untainted by the existing corruption or possessed the will to confront it. Her late husband, David Thompson, had always emphasized the importance of understanding the power dynamics within any organization. "Find the fulcrum, Maya," he used to say, "and even a small lever can move a mountain." She began her research into the NWPD's command structure. The current chief of police, a man named Alastair Finch, was a holdover from a previous city administration, widely seen as a lame duck, coasting towards retirement, unlikely to rock any boats. But below him, there were captains, deputy chiefs. Who among them might be receptive? Who might have a reputation for integrity or, perhaps, an ambition that could be appealed to? Her community contacts provided some insight. Captain Eva Rostova, commander of the downtown precinct, was often mentioned. She was known as a no-nonsense, by-the-book officer, a woman who had risen through the ranks despite the department's often chauvinistic culture. She was respected, if not universally liked, for her professionalism and her demanding standards. Some considered her an outsider herself, not part of the good old boys network. Rostova, Maya decided, was her best bet. Getting a meeting, however, proved to be another challenge. Captain Rostova's schedule was notoriously tight. her gatekeeper, and equally formidable administrative assistant. Maya's initial calls, identifying herself as a community volunteer with a departmental concern, went nowhere. It was time, she realized, to subtly deploy the lever David had spoken of. She drafted a carefully worded email to Captain Rostova. In it, she briefly outlined her concerns about a specific incident of officer misconduct she had witnessed and the subsequent difficulties she had faced in having her complaint properly addressed. She kept the details concise, professional, avoiding emotional language. And then, at the very end, almost as an afterthought, she added a single sentence. My late husband, Commissioner David Thompson, always believed that accountability was the bedrock of public trust in law enforcement. A principle I know you also uphold from your distinguished record. She signed it Maya T. Evans. The T was deliberate. She waited. 2 days later, Captain Rostova's assistant called to schedule a meeting. The fulcrum had been found. The office of Captain Eva Rostova was a stark contrast to Sergeant Miller's cluttered den. It was Spartan, organized, reflecting the woman herself. Rostova was in her early 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority that brooked no nonsense. She listened intently as Maya recounted, calmly and factually, the incident in the park with Officer Donnelly, his lewd gesture and remarks, and her subsequent encounter with Sergeant Miller, including his dismissive attitude and veiled threats. She presented her meticulously kept log of unanswered calls and stonewalling. Throughout Maya's account, Captain Rostova remained impassive, her expression unreadable. Only a slight tightening of her jaw when Maya described Donnelly's skirt-lifting action hinted at any internal reaction. When Maya finished, Rostova was silent for a long moment, her gaze steady. Mrs. Evans, she said finally, her voice cool and professional. Your late husband, Commissioner Thompson, was a man I admired greatly. I attended several of his lectures on police ethics early in my career. His work was transformative. Maya felt a small surge of relief. The connection had been acknowledged. He often spoke of the courage it takes to challenge entrenched misconduct from within, Maya replied. He also believed that citizens have a vital role to play in holding their police accountable. Rostova nodded slowly. Officer Rick Donnelly, she said, the name tasting like something unpleasant. His file is extensive, as is Sergeant Frank Miller's. Your experience, unfortunately, aligns with a pattern of behavior that has been difficult to formally address, shall we say, due to certain internal loyalties. She paused, then leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting Maya's directly. You mentioned witnesses to the incident in the park, Mrs. Evans, and you stated you were using your maiden name for most of your volunteer work. But for the purpose of this formal complaint, which I assure you will be thoroughly investigated, I will need your full legal name. Maya took a breath. This was the moment. My full legal name is Maya Thompson Evans. For the complaint, given the context of my late husband's work and the nature of this issue, I believe it is appropriate to use the name Maya Thompson. Captain Rostova's expression, for the first time, showed a flicker of something more than professional interest. It was a dawning understanding, a recognition of the weight that name carried, not as a threat of undue influence, but as a symbol of an unyielding commitment to justice. Maya Thompson, Rostova repeated softly, as if testing the sound of it. She then picked up her desk phone. This is Captain Rostova. I need Lieutenant Davies from Internal Affairs in my office immediately. And pull the complete service jackets and all prior complaint files for Officer Rick Donnelly and Sergeant Frank Miller. Yes, all of them. No, Davies, this isn't a request. She hung up and looked at Maya. A new light had entered her eyes, a glint of determination, perhaps even a shared sense of mission. Mrs. Thompson, she said, a subtle emphasis on the name, I believe Officer Donnelly is about to discover that his good old-fashioned fun is going to have some very serious, old-fashioned consequences. And Sergeant Miller will learn that some complaints cannot be so easily misplaced. The mountain was about to move. Lieutenant Marcus Davies from Internal Affairs was a seasoned detective, a man who had seen his share of departmental dirt and had grown weary of the political games that often shielded problematic officers. When Captain Rostova laid out Maya Thompson's complaint, along with her own observations about the patterns of behavior associated with Donnelly and Miller, Davies listened with a grim professionalism. The name Thompson, linked to the late commissioner, immediately signaled that this was no ordinary citizen complaint. This had the potential to explode. "Captain," Davies said after reviewing Maya's meticulous notes, "if Mrs. Thompson's account is accurate, and frankly, it aligns with a lot of the unofficial chatter we hear about Donnelly, then we're not just looking at a harassment charge. We're looking at a pattern of abuse of authority, potentially obstruction by Sergeant Miller, and a clear violation of departmental ethics. The fact that Mrs. Thompson is who she is will undoubtedly bring a higher level of scrutiny to this entire precinct." Rostova nodded. "That's precisely why we need to handle this by the book, Lieutenant. Impeccably. I want every I dotted, every T crossed. Donnelly and Miller, and any of their associates who try to interfere, will be given no procedural loopholes to exploit." The investigation began with a quiet intensity. Lieutenant Davies and a hand-picked team of IA investigators, known for their integrity and their immunity to the old guard's influence, started by discreetly interviewing the other volunteers who had been present at the Community Day event. The retired couple from the Historical Society, initially hesitant, confirmed Maya's account of Donnelly's lewd remarks and the skirt-lifting incident, their indignation at the officer's behavior reignited by the seriousness of the IA inquiry. The young intern from the mayor's office, though nervous, also corroborated the story. Then came Officer Ramirez, summoned to IA. He was visibly anxious, but with the assurance of Captain Rostova's backing and Lieutenant Davies's professional demeanor, he found the courage to speak. He not only confirmed the incident in the park, but also recounted other instances of Donnelly's inappropriate behavior he had witnessed, his bullying tactics towards junior officers, and the general atmosphere of intimidation cultivated by Donnelly and his clique. Ramirez also provided names of other officers who were part of Donnelly's inner circle, those who often participated in or enabled his misconduct. This was crucial. It allowed IA to widen the scope of their investigation beyond just Donnelly and Miller. Word of a serious IA investigation, personally overseen by Captain Rostova and targeting Rick Donnelly, began to spread like wildfire through the precinct. Donnelly, initially dismissive, started to feel a prickle of unease. His usual channels of information within IA were suddenly silent. Sergeant Miller, when Donnelly approached him, was uncharacteristically evasive, muttering something about Rostova going on a witch hunt and advising Donnelly to keep his head down. The old guard was starting to feel the pressure. Their protective shield was showing cracks. Donnelly's arrogance, however, died hard. He still believed he was too well-connected, too entrenched, to face any real consequences. He continued his usual swagger, though perhaps with a little less conviction. He even tried to subtly intimidate Maya again, making a point of parking his patrol car outside the community center for an extended period, his gaze lingering on her as she came and went. But Maya, now knowing that a serious investigation was underway, met his stares with a calm, unwavering resolve that seemed to unnerve him more than any overt defiance. The IA team meticulously gathered evidence. They pulled Donnelly's and Miller's personnel files, revealing a history of complaints, mostly from minority citizens or women, that had been consistently dismissed with cursory investigations or deemed unfounded. They cross-referenced these with duty rosters, patrol logs, and witness statements, building a compelling picture of a pattern of abuse and a systemic failure of accountability. Captain Rostova received daily updates from Lieutenant Davies. The evidence against Donnelly was mounting, not just for the incident with Maya, but for a string of similar, previously buried transgressions. The case against Sergeant Miller for obstruction and for fostering a culture that enabled such misconduct was also strengthening. The name Thompson continued to be a quiet but powerful undercurrent. While Maya herself never wielded it as a weapon, its very existence seemed to lend a heightened sense of urgency and importance to the investigation. No one wanted to be seen as mishandling a case involving the widow of the legendary Commissioner Thompson. It was a subtle but undeniable pressure that helped to counteract the usual institutional inertia. Donnelly's world was beginning to shake. The laughter of his cronies seemed a little more forced, their assurances a little less confident. He started making more calls to his union representative, his voice edged with a frustration that was rapidly morphing into something akin to panic. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and the woman he had so casually dismissed, the Little Miss community helper, was proving to be a far more formidable adversary than he could ever have imagined. She wasn't just Maya Evans, the quiet volunteer. She was Maya Thompson, and she carried the weight of a legacy that demanded justice. The formal notification landed on Officer Rick Donnelly's desk with a thud that seemed to reverberate through the entire squad room. It was an official summons from Internal Affairs, requiring his presence for a formal interview regarding multiple allegations of misconduct, including harassment, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The notice was signed by Lieutenant Davies but CC'd to Captain Rostova. The message was clear. This was serious, and it had backing from the top of the precinct. Donnelly stared at the paper, his face paling. His usual bluster evaporated, replaced by a clammy fear. He'd faced IA inquiries before, always managing to skate by with a smirk and a slap on the wrist, thanks to friends in high places and a system that often prioritized protecting its own over genuine accountability. But this felt different. The name Rostova and the thoroughness implied by multiple allegations sent a chill down his spine. He immediately sought out Sergeant Miller, storming into his office without knocking. "Frank, what the hell is this?" Donnelly demanded, waving the summons. "Rostova's out of control. You got to do something, talk to someone, the union, somebody." Sergeant Miller, who had received a similar, albeit slightly less alarming, notice regarding an inquiry into his supervisory practices, looked haggard. His usual air of smug authority was gone, replaced by a worried frown. "Rick, I've tried," Miller said, his voice low and defeated. "This isn't like the old days. Rostova's running this by the book, a very thick book. And there's the Thompson angle." "Thompson? What Thompson angle?" Donnelly snapped, impatient. "The volunteer, Evans. Her full name is Maya Thompson Evans, as in, widow of Commissioner David Thompson." "The David Thompson." Donnelly's jaw dropped. "Commissioner Thompson? The legendary reformer? The scourge of corrupt cops?" He felt a wave of nausea. He had harassed, physically accosted, and then tried to intimidate the widow of one of the most respected figures in modern law enforcement history. The sheer, monumental stupidity of his actions crashed down on him. His playful skirt lifting, his sneering remarks, suddenly seemed not just crude, but suicidally reckless. You knew this?" Donnelly stammered at Miller. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't connect the dots until Rostova started digging, Rick." Miller retorted, defensive. "She's using the Thompson name quietly, but it's definitely greasing the wheels for this investigation. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of that legacy." Donnelly sank into a chair, his bravado completely gone. He was no longer the cocky veteran cop. He was a man staring into an abyss. He thought of his years on the force, the favors he'd done, the corners he'd cut, the people he'd bullied. He had always assumed he was protected, part of an unbreakable blue wall. Now, that wall was crumbling around him, and it was largely because of a single, arrogant act against a woman he had deemed insignificant. The IA interview was brutal. Lieutenant Davies, with Captain Rostova sitting in as an observer, presented Donnelly with a mountain of evidence. Maya's detailed complaint, the corroborating statements from the park volunteers, Officer Ramirez's damning testimony about Donnelly's pattern of behavior and his remarks after the incident. They played segments of security footage from businesses near where Donnelly had been accused of harassing minority youths. They showed him copies of old complaints, previously dismissed, now recontextualized in light of the new evidence. Donnelly tried to lie, to deflect, to minimize. He claimed Maya had misunderstood his friendly gesture. He accused Officer Ramirez of being a disgruntled rookie with an axe to grind. He blustered about his years of dedicated service. But Davies and Rostova remained impassive, methodically dismantling his defenses. "Officer Donnelly," Captain Rostova said, her voice cold and precise, "your record shows a consistent pattern of disrespect, particularly towards women and minority citizens. This incident with Mrs. Thompson was not an isolated joke. It was an abuse of your authority and a disgrace to this department. And your subsequent attempts to intimidate her, along with Sergeant Miller's efforts to obstruct a legitimate complaint, are equally serious." The full weight of his situation finally seemed to penetrate Donnelly's thick skull. He saw his career, his pension, his carefully constructed tough guy reputation, all evaporating before his eyes. The regret was no longer just a flicker. It was a raging inferno of self-preservation. "Look, Captain," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "I made a mistake. A stupid mistake. I wasn't thinking. I am sorry. I'll apologize to Mrs. Thompson. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't do this. Don't ruin my life over one misunderstanding." Rostova's expression remained unmoved. "Officer Donnelly, this is far beyond a single misunderstanding. This is about a fundamental breach of public trust, a pattern of behavior that has tarnished the badge you wear, and it will be dealt with accordingly." The interview concluded. Donnelly left the IA office a broken man, the swagger gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of defeat. The news of the IA's findings and the strength of the case against Donnelly sent further shockwaves through the department. The old guard was in disarray. Some tried to distance themselves from Donnelly, suddenly remembering his problematic behavior. Others grumbled about a witch hunt, but their voices lacked conviction. The tide had definitively turned. The formal disciplinary hearing for Officer Rick Donnelly was convened a month later. It was not a public trial, but an internal departmental proceeding, yet its significance was lost on no one within the Northwood Police Department. Captain Rostova had ensured that the panel was comprised of officers with unblemished records from different precincts, minimizing the potential for old guard influence. Lieutenant Davies presented the IA's case with meticulous detail, laying out the evidence of Donnelly's harassment of Maya Thompson, the corroborating witness testimonies, Officer Ramirez's brave account of Donnelly's broader pattern of misconduct and his attempts to foster a culture of intimidation, and the damning history of previously suppressed complaints. Donnelly, represented by a sullen union lawyer who seemed to know he was fighting a losing battle, offered a weak defense. He stuck to his story of a misunderstood joke, of Maya being oversensitive. He painted himself as a victim of changing times, an old-school cop who didn't understand the new rules of political correctness. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage from the park, though grainy, clearly showed the deliberate nature of his actions. The consistency of the witness statements, including those from fellow officers, was undeniable. Maya Thompson was called to testify. She recounted the incident calmly, factually, without embellishment or overt emotion. Her quiet dignity, her refusal to be drawn into an angry confrontation, made her testimony all the more powerful. She spoke not just of her own humiliation, but of the broader implications of such behavior by a sworn officer of the law. When an officer, in uniform, in a public place, engages in such demeaning and aggressive behavior, Maya stated, her gaze steady, it erodes the trust between the community and the police. It sends a message that some citizens are not worthy of respect, that some abuses will be tolerated. That is a message this department and this city can no longer afford to send. Her words resonated deeply with the panel. Officer Ramirez also testified, recounting Donnelly's actions and his subsequent attempts to intimidate him into silence. His testimony was particularly impactful, coming from within the ranks, a clear breach of the blue wall of silence that had protected officers like Donnelly for so long. After 2 days of hearings, the panel delivered its verdict. Officer Rick Donnelly was found guilty on multiple counts of misconduct, including harassment, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Their recommendation to the chief of police, who, for procedural fairness in this specific case, given her direct involvement as the victim had delegated the final decision to a deputy chief from an uninvolved jurisdiction appointed by the city manager, was unequivocal: termination of employment. The news of Donnelly's impending dismissal sent shockwaves through the department. It was a clear and undeniable message that the old ways were over. Accountability was no longer a buzzword. It was a reality. Sergeant Frank Miller, facing his own disciplinary hearing for obstruction and failure to properly supervise, and seeing the fate of his protege, opted for a hasty retirement, disappearing from the force with little fanfare, his legacy tarnished. Several other officers known to be part of Donnelly's Watchmen clique found their own past actions under renewed scrutiny. Some faced internal investigations. Others quietly resigned or transferred to other, less discerning departments. The old guard's grip on the Northwood Police Department was broken. Maya Thompson, though she had been the catalyst for this upheaval, took no overt satisfaction in Donnelly's downfall. Her goal had never been revenge, but reform. She had wanted to ensure that what happened to her would not happen to others, that the culture of disrespect and impunity within the NWPD would be dismantled. With Donnelly's termination, a significant step in that direction had been taken. The external perception of the NWPD also began to shift. News of Donnelly's firing and of Chief Rostova's. Maya had quietly insisted Rostova take the public title and lead for now. Though she was the guiding hand, commitment to reform was met with cautious optimism by community leaders and civil rights organizations. They saw it as a genuine sign that change was possible. Officer Ramirez, who had risked his career to tell the truth, was publicly commended by Captain Rostova and Lieutenant Davies for his courage and integrity. He became a symbol of the new breed of officer that the department was trying to cultivate. His actions inspired other younger officers to come forward with their own concerns about misconduct they had witnessed, further aiding the cleanup efforts. Maya continued her volunteer work, but her role began to subtly change. She was no longer just Maya Evans, the quiet community liaison. She was Maya Thompson, a woman who had faced down departmental corruption and won, a woman who carried the legacy of a renowned reformer. People sought her out, listened to her advice, respected her insights. Captain Rostova frequently consulted with her on community engagement strategies and reform initiatives. The Thompson legacy, once a quiet undercurrent, was now a visible force for positive change in Northwood City. The months following Rick Donnelly's dismissal were a period of profound transition for the Northwood Police Department. Under the de facto leadership and strategic guidance of Maya Thompson, working closely with Captain Eva Rostova, who had been officially named acting chief, the seeds of reform began to take root and blossom. It wasn't an easy process. Decades of ingrained culture, mistrust, and bad habits couldn't be undone overnight. But the message sent by Donnelly's termination and the subsequent dismantling of the Watchman's influence was a powerful catalyst. One of the first major initiatives was a complete overhaul of the department's training program. Maya, drawing on her late husband's pioneering work and her own extensive research, helped design new modules focused on de-escalation techniques, implicit bias awareness, procedural justice, and community partnership building. Role-playing scenarios based on real-life incidents, including carefully anonymized versions of encounters like the one Maya had experienced, became a core part of recruit training and in-service training for veteran officers. The goal was not just to teach new rules, but to foster a new mindset, one where officers saw themselves as guardians of the community, not warriors against it. Officer Ben Ramirez, promoted to sergeant for his integrity and leadership potential, became a key instructor in these new training programs. His personal story, a powerful testament to the importance of ethical conduct. He often spoke of Maya's courage in standing up to Donnelly, inspiring new recruits to find their own moral compass. Another critical reform was the establishment of a robust and truly independent Civilian Complaint Review Board, CCRB. Maya had insisted on this, arguing that true accountability required external oversight. The board was comprised of community members from diverse backgrounds, vetted for their impartiality and commitment to justice. They were given full investigatory powers and the authority to recommend disciplinary action, recommendations that the acting chief Rostova pledged to take with utmost seriousness. This was a radical departure from the old system where internal affairs, often staffed by officers loyal to the existing power structure, had effectively policed itself. The new CCRB quickly became a trusted avenue for citizens to voice their grievances, and its transparent proceedings helped to slowly rebuild community trust. Maya also spearheaded the expansion of community policing initiatives. Officers were encouraged to get out of their patrol cars, to walk the beat, to attend neighborhood meetings, to build genuine relationships with the residents they served. Foot patrols and coffee talks programs were launched, where officers and community members could interact in informal settings, breaking down barriers and fostering mutual understanding. Officer Sofia Ramirez, from Miller's old precinct whom Serena, acting as Maya, had met, became a shining example of this new approach, her natural empathy and communication skills making her a beloved figure in the neighborhood she patrolled. The changes weren't universally embraced. A small contingent of disgruntled veteran officers, those who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the new ethos, grumbled about social work and handcuffing the police. Some chose to retire early. A few were weeded out through the reinvigorated disciplinary process when their resistance crossed the line into active insubordination or continued misconduct. But the vast majority of the department, particularly the younger officers, welcomed the new direction. They were tired of being associated with the abuses of the past, eager for an opportunity to serve with honor and to be seen as true partners by the community. Morale, which had initially plummeted during the upheaval, began to slowly rise as officers felt a renewed sense of purpose and pride in their work. Maya Thompson, though she held no official title beyond special advisor to the acting chief on community relations and reform, became an indispensable part of this transformation. She worked tirelessly, often behind the scenes, leveraging her experience, her intellect, and the profound respect she now commanded. She helped draft new policies, mediated disputes, mentored young officers, and served as a crucial bridge between the department and the community. She never sought the spotlight, always deflecting praise to Captain Rostova and the officers on the ground who were implementing the changes. But everyone in Northwood knew who the quiet architect of this new era was. The city council, impressed by the tangible improvements in police-community relations and the drop in citizen complaints, formally offered Maya the permanent position of chief of police. It was a testament to how far she and the city had come. The woman who had been kicked and dismissed in a courtroom was now being asked to lead the entire department. The irony was not lost on her. After careful consideration, Maya politely declined the permanent chief position, recommending instead that Captain Rostova, who had proven herself to be a capable and principled leader throughout the reform process, be given the role. My strengths lie in strategy, in community building, in advising, Maya explained to the council. Captain Rostova is an exceptional operational leader, deeply respected within the ranks that matter. She is the right person to carry these reforms forward on a daily basis. She did, however, agree to head the newly reconstituted and empowered Civilian Oversight Board, a position from which she could continue to guide the department's progress and ensure accountability. This decision was met with widespread approval. It demonstrated her continued commitment to Northwood, while also empowering a new generation of leadership within the NWPD itself. A year after Rick Donnelly's dismissal, Oakwood Park, the site of his initial act of harassment against Maya, hosted a very different kind of community day. The atmosphere was palpably changed. There was a genuine sense of partnership between the police officers present and the community members. Gone was the swagger and intimidation of the past. In its place was respectful engagement, open dialogue, and even shared laughter. Chief Eva Rostova, now firmly at the helm of the NWPD, walked through the crowd, shaking hands, listening to concerns, her demeanor approachable and professional. Sergeant Ben Ramirez, now a respected leader in the community policing unit, was surrounded by a group of teenagers, animatedly discussing a youth basketball league he was helping to organize with the department's support. Officer Sofia Ramirez was at a booth showcasing the department's new de-escalation training tools, patiently explaining their purpose to curious residents. Maya Thompson stood near the neighborhood watch table, just as she had a little over a year ago. But this time, she was not an overlooked volunteer. She was the esteemed chair of the Civilian Oversight Board, a figure of quiet authority and deep respect. People approach her constantly to thank her for her work, to share an idea, or simply to shake her hand. As she surveyed the scene, the relaxed interactions, the genuine smiles, the sense of a community beginning to heal, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The journey had been arduous, fraught with challenges and resistance. But the transformation, however incomplete, was real. Later that afternoon, as the event was winding down, a man approached Maya hesitantly. He was older, his face etched with the hard lines of a life lived on the margins, his clothes worn but clean. Maya vaguely recognized him as someone who occasionally frequented the park, often sitting alone on a bench, much like she had once seen her own father-in-law do in his later years. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice rough but respectful. "Mrs. Thompson, I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" Maya asked gently. For changing things," the man said, gesturing vaguely towards the police officers who were now helping to pack up tables alongside community volunteers. "It used to be we were scared to even walk through this park if a cop car was nearby. Now it feels different. They talk to us. They actually listen." He paused, then added, "My boy, he got into some trouble a while back. Nothing serious, but the officer who handled it, young fella, Ramirez, I think his name was, he treated my boy with respect. Gave him a talking to ya, but like he was a human being, not just another problem. That wouldn't have happened before. Not here." Maya's eyes welled up slightly. She thought this was what it was all about. Not the headlines, not the political victories, but these small, individual moments of restored dignity, of rebuilt trust. This was the true measure of reform. "That's good to hear," Maya said, her voice warm. "That's what we're all working towards." As the man walked away, a figure from her more recent past approached. It was Rick Donnelly. He looked different. Thinner, perhaps, the arrogance that had once defined him completely gone, replaced by a quiet humility that was almost startling. He had served a brief period of community service as part of a minor plea deal on a lesser charge stemming from an older, unearthed complaint. The kick itself had been handled departmentally due to the complexities of proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt, though his termination stood firm. He now worked a manual labor job for a construction company. "Mrs. Thompson," Donnelly said, his voice barely above a whisper. He twisted a battered baseball cap in his hands. I know I don't have any right to speak to you. After what I did." Maya waited, her expression neutral but not unkind. I wanted to tell you, I've had a lot of time to think. About that day. About a lot of things. I was a bully. A fool. I thought being a cop meant, I don't know, being tough, being in charge, making people afraid. I see now, that's not strength. That's just weakness." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time, and she saw a flicker of genuine remorse. "What you did, standing up to me, to the whole damn system, it took real guts. Guts I never had. You changed this city, Mrs. Thompson. You really did. And, I guess in a way, you changed me too. For the better, I hope." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He simply offered his belated, broken acknowledgement. Maya listened, and then she nodded slowly. "Mr. Donnelly," she said, "everyone has the capacity for change. What matters is what you do with that understanding now." He nodded, a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am, for listening." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the thinning crowd. Maya watched him go, a complex mix of emotions stirring within her. There was no triumph, no desire for further retribution, only a quiet acknowledgement of a painful chapter closed, an enduring hope for human redemption, however imperfect. The legacy of Commissioner David Thompson lived on, not just in grand pronouncements or statues, but in the daily work of building a more just and equitable world, one community, one interaction, one changed heart at a time. And Maya Thompson, in her own quiet, powerful way, was ensuring that legacy would continue to shine brightly in Northwood City and beyond. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a warm glow over Oakwood Park. The last of the Community Day attendees were departing, their voices softer now, tinged with the pleasant weariness of a day well spent. Chief Eva Rostova found Maya sitting on a park bench, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. "Quite a day, Maya," Rostova said, settling beside her. "A world of difference from what this park and this department looked like not so long ago." Maya smiled. "It is, Eva. It truly is. Progress, slow but steady." "Thanks to you," Rostova said quietly. "You were the catalyst. You had the courage to stand up when it would have been so much easier to walk away. You reminded us all what real leadership looks like." Maya demurred. "It was a team effort, Eva. You, Sergeant Ramirez, Officer Ramirez, so many others within the department who wanted change, and the community who finally felt heard. But you gave them a platform, Maya. You gave them the hope. The Thompson legacy, it's a powerful thing. But you, Maya Thompson Evans, you are a force in your own right." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, two women who had navigated treacherous institutional waters and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, and with a city slowly healing in their wake. "Did you see Donnelly earlier?" Rostova asked. Maya nodded. "He came by. He seems changed. Time, and a hard dose of reality, can do that to a man," Rostova mused. "I hear he's actually doing decent work. Keeps his head down. Maybe there's hope for him yet." "There's hope for everyone, Eva," Maya said softly. "That's what we have to believe, isn't it? Otherwise, what's the point of all this?" The park was almost empty now, the lights from the nearby street casting long shadows. The sounds of the city, a distant siren, the rumble of traffic, were a reminder that the work was never truly done. There would always be new challenges, new injustices to confront. But tonight, there was a sense of peace, of a battle hard fought, and a significant victory won. Chief Rostova stood. "Well, I should let you get home. Thank you again, Maya, for everything. Thank you, Eva, for your courage and your friendship." As Rostova walked away, Maya remained on the bench, her gaze drifting towards the spot where a little over a year ago, Officer Rick Donnelly had committed an act of casual cruelty that had set so much in motion. She thought of the humiliation, the frustration, the initial sense of helplessness. And then she thought of the quiet resolve that had followed, the determination to seek not revenge, but justice, not just for herself, but for all those who had suffered silently under a broken system. Her late husband, David, had often quoted a line from an old reformer. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Maya had learned that sometimes that arc needed a firm, courageous hand to help it bend. It required individuals willing to speak truth to power, to challenge entrenched wrongs, to risk their own comfort for the sake of a greater good. The journey in Northwood City was a testament to that. It showed that one person, armed with integrity and a refusal to accept injustice, could indeed be a catalyst for profound change. It demonstrated that even the most resistant institutions could be reformed, if the will and the leadership were present. And it reaffirmed that the most potent force for good is often found not in the loudest voices or the most aggressive actions, but in the quiet, steadfast courage of those who simply refuse to let an injustice stand. Maya Evans, Maya Thompson, had been kicked down, but she had risen, not just for herself, but for an entire community. And in doing so, she had not only honored her husband's legacy, but had forged a powerful one of her own. The fireflies danced in the twilight, small beacons of light in the gathering dark, a fitting metaphor for the hope that now flickered brighter in Northwood City. The work would continue, the vigilance maintained, but tonight, there was reason to believe that the long arc was indeed bending, slowly but surely, towards a more just and respectful future for all. What does true accountability look like to you when those in power abuse their trust? Is it termination, legal action, public apology, or a combination of these and other measures? Share your perspective in the comments section below. If you were inspired by Maya's courage and the transformation in Northwood City, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories that highlight the power of integrity and the fight for justice. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who believe in the possibility of positive change and the impact one determined individual can make. Thank you for watching.